Moroccan sovereignty over the entire Western Sahara territory. This was after Morocco signed a deal aimed at normalising relations with Israel. But the African Union stands opposed to Morocco's occupation of Western Sahara and continues to demand that Morocco gives the region autonomy. Coletta Wanjohi now reports from Addis Ababa.
The Kingdom of Morocco and Sahrawi Republic suffer territorial dispute. Western Sahara contests its 1975 annexation by Morocco after the withdrawal of ex-colonial power Spain. The United States, in a statement, says it reaffirms its support for what it terms as Morocco's realistic autonomy proposal for a lasting solution to the dispute over the Sahrawi Republic. But the African Union terms the occupation of Sahrawi as wrong. In its summit early this month, the AU Chairperson Cyril Ramaphosa said every effort should be made to facilitate the self-determination of the people of Western Sahara. The Sahrawi Republic has called on the African Union to apply sanctions to Morocco for its occupation of Western Sahara and to stop its expansionist practices. The United Nations brokered a 1991 ceasefire pact between the two states that largely held until November this year, when fighting between the two broke out. Morocco remains opposed to a referendum for the region that offered the option of independence to Sahrawi Republic. Morocco quit the Organization of the African Unity in 1984 after the bloc admitted the Western Sahara as a separate member. The African Union allowed Morocco to rejoin in 2017. Coletta Wanjohi, SABC News, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Well, the African Union of Friday said that its position was unchanged on the disputed Western Sahara region after the United States recognized Morocco's sovereignty over the disputed territory. The AU regards Western Sahara as a non-self-governing territory. African Union Chairperson, Spokesperson Ebba Kalondo tweeted on Friday that the position of the AU regarding Western Sahara remains unchanged, in conformity with the relevant AU and United Nations resolutions. This is part of a deal to normalise relations between Israel and Morocco. President Donald Trump said Washington would recognise Morocco's claim of sovereignty over Western Sahara. Sarah Kimani reports.
In the Algerian desert town of Tindouf, thousands of Sahrawi refugees live in cramped shelters with the hope of one day going back home, a home which has for more than 4 decades been under occupation. Morocco has occupied its neighbor Western Sahara since 1975, when Spain, the colonial power, withdrew. Morocco moved in, claiming the territory was part of the kingdom. Its occupation was opposed by the Polisario Front, which took up arms to fight for independence. An independence referendum organized by the United Nations in 1992 aborted after Morocco disputed the voters' roll. UN mediation failed in March last year, and there has not been attempts to revive them. Trump's announcement declaring U.S. support for Morocco's control of Western Sahara will unsettle several allies, including the African Union, which has for years recognized the right of the Western Sahara to self-determination. Renewed fighting broke out in Western Sahara mid-last month between the Polisario and Moroccan troops, threatening a 21-year-old ceasefire. Sarah Kimani, SABC News.
Well, for more on this story, we're now joined via Skype by Afro-Middle East Centre Executive Director Naeem Jeenah. Naeem, thanks very much indeed for joining us. The last time we spoke, we saw normalization of relations between Israel and other Arab countries. And one just wonders if this is, I don't know, another Trump effort towards Israel more than it is towards Morocco.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is Trump's kind of swan song to get as many Arab countries as possible to recognize Israel and to open diplomatic relations with Israel. So the last one is Sudan, before that the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, and now it's Morocco. And of course, what Trump offered Morocco is what Morocco has been wanting for decades now, which is sovereignty over the Western Sahara, or as the Polisario would call it, the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic. The thing is, Peter, that this being his swan song, it also means that in a month's time, or just over a month's time, Donald Trump is no longer going to be the president of the United States. There'll be a new president. And that new president, Joe Biden, is determined to repair relations with American allies, particularly European allies, moving forward. And that's probably his most urgent task from his perspective. And European states have reacted very unhappily to Trump's recognition of Moroccan sovereignty over the Western Sahara. So there's a good chance that Biden is going to reverse that recognition. That will leave Morocco in a position where it will normalize relations with Israel, but will get nothing back in return, frankly. I think a bit of an embarrassing situation for Morocco that it could find itself in.
All right. I mean, they must have known this. Are they just hoping that Biden's hands would be tied? But I guess it's such a serious situation that he probably has to reverse it.
I think he will have to. Look, his big thing, apart from wanting to repair ties with allies, the other big thing is that he wants the U.S. to be seen on the global stage as a power, a superpower that respects international law and all of that kind of thing. The recognition of Moroccan sovereignty over Western Sahara is a violation of international law because there are UN Security Council resolutions which make it clear that that is not the position. And UN Security Council resolutions form part of international law. So I'm pretty sure that he won't see himself having much of a choice, not because he loves the Western Sahara or not because he hates Morocco, but because of the positioning he's taken in opposition to Trump. But the issue about Morocco probably saw it in that way. They will use it in a kind of symbolic sense, or in a moral sense, to say that the United States had recognized their sovereignty over Western Sahara. Even in 5 years' time, they will continue to say that, even though it's been reversed. The reality also, however, is that this is, it's certainly a huge thing that Morocco is normalizing relations with Israel. But Morocco has had relations with Israel for decades. It's not been diplomatic relations. They've not been embassies in each other's country. But going back to the 1960s, I mean, the story around the 1967 Arab-Israeli war is that the Arab League meeting to plan the strategy for that war took place in Rabat, in Morocco. And the Moroccans recorded the meeting and handed over the recordings of this Arab League strategy to Israel. So the relationship between Morocco and Israel go back many decades, pretty strong. And this is just adding an extra dimension to it. So it's not such a huge thing for Morocco even.
What's in it for Morocco to normalize relationships at a diplomatic level? I mean, what will it do other than perhaps upset some of their brothers and sisters in the Arab world? What can they gain by being such good friends with Israel?
Well, what they gain immediately, of course, is the saying that it recognizes Moroccan sovereignty over the Western Sahara. For Morocco, this is a huge thing, and they would go to great lengths to get other states to grant them that recognition. I mean, the amount of effort and money that they've spent on the African continent to win over African states to that position is massive. In the case of the United States, they didn't have to spend money and effort. The U.S. came to them, and all they had to do was the normalization with Israel. But also, it's not like Morocco is the first Arab state doing this. They're following the UAE and Bahrain. They're following Sudan, which is not only an Arab state but an African state. And so, in a sense, they find themselves not isolated the company of these other states. So it's less uncomfortable for Morocco than it was, for example, for Sudan. When Sudan did it, and Sudan did it really out of some desperation and under great pressure, both from the US and from the UAE. For Morocco, it's a bit of an easier one than for Sudan.
Okay, one understands the symbolism, but America is just one country. Did it really make that much of a difference if just America recognizes Morocco's sovereignty in Western Sahara when perhaps the rest of the world doesn't?
I would say no. Look, from the Moroccan perspective, it's one state at a time. That's how they've worked on the African continent, one state at a time, to the point where they're now looking at a situation where they believe, apart from Algeria in the north and most of SADC, the rest of the continent is on their side. Whether it's true or not, that's the way they've been working for more than a decade now to win over one state at a time. So to win over the United States, it's not just another state. It's not an African state. It's a superpower. To have them make this kind of statement and this kind of recognition, yes, it's a violation of international law. Yes, it goes against UN Security Council resolutions. Yes, even the other 4 permanent members of the UN Security Council will not agree. This will not pass the Security Council. And so in terms of international law, it means nothing. But from the Moroccan perspective, the United States has spoken. And so, that symbolism, I think we shouldn't underestimate it, what it means. And Morocco, of course, also has very strong relations in various kinds of ways with the United States, including military, intelligence, all of that. And so this is, working with a partner in a sense.
Some people might say that the African Union hasn't been as committed as it could be in terms of dealing with the Moroccan Western Sahara question. Might this incident, agitate some action?
Some people might say that, and they might be correct in my opinion. But on your second question, no, I don't think it's going to agitate anything. The AU has made a statement that the US recognition doesn't change anything. I believe that that's as far as they will go on the issue, a few statements like that perhaps. The style of the AU is that they actually don't, as a continental body, don't get directly involved in such conflicts. Often it's more regional, the regional economic communities, the RECs, that are more forceful in dealing with such issues in their own neighborhood. I don't think that the African Union is, for example, going to put any pressure on Morocco, is not going to force a kind of mediation. They would like to mediate, but Morocco is not interested. They're not going to force that. It's just not the style in which the AU works. They prefer to work in a style where everyone is on board and there's some sense of consensus, and they don't want to upset their members. Morocco is the newest member, but it is also a member that by the time it joined the AU, it was certain that it had the support of at least a couple dozen countries on the African continent. And if the AU tries to take a strong line against it, which, as I say, it's not its style, there will be many other states on the continent that will be behind Morocco.
All right, so lots of conversations have been had, African Union level, United Nations level. They've even had peace talks along the way. And one might even say this sounds a bit like the Palestine-Israeli conflict, where there's always talks, then there's a bit of a truce, then there's a flare-up, and then it starts again, but never really getting too far. Is there an end game in sight for the Morocco-Western Sahara question, or is that just going to keep bumbling along?
I think it's going to bumble along for a while, but I also think that the Sahrawi people and Polisario, their representative, is in a pretty difficult situation, even compared to the Palestinians. They don't have the kind of global visibility, say, that the Palestinians and the Palestinian struggle has. On the one hand, on the other, Morocco is winning more and more support, and the capacity and ability of Polisario to confront Morocco is minimal, frankly. What is the alternative? Well, I mean, the United Nations position is that there should be a referendum of the people of the Western Sahara for them to decide whether they want to be independent or whether they want to be part of Morocco. What Morocco has been doing since 1975, or at least since 1990-1992, has been working very hard to ensure that even if that eventuates, even if it comes to a point where there is a referendum, that they've created, this term that the Israelis use, new facts on the ground that will ensure that things will go their way. So they've moved over the past couple of decades Moroccans into the Western Sahara area and made them kind of people of the Western Sahara. So if there's a referendum that will take place tomorrow, as it stands, of the people who live there in that territory, Morocco is betting that if such a referendum takes place tomorrow, the majority will vote to go with Morocco because the majority is people that they've moved into that area. So they haven't been sitting back. They've been moving on this issue. So, I think that there's a three-party conversation that needs to be had. And it's the kind of level at which the AU should push to be involved. And that is a conversation between Morocco, Polisario, and Algeria, and find a way that will address the concerns of the Sahrawi people, and end this kind of marginalization and refugeehood that they found themselves in for decades now, that will satisfy them and will be acceptable to all parties concerned. Will independence of the SADR do that? I'm not entirely sure that is the case. Will Morocco's autonomy proposal do that? I'm not sure that everyone will be happy with that. And right now, I'm not sure that Morocco, especially after this bit of a coup with the Americans, still have that autonomy proposal on the table. So your question, yes, I think the issue is going to stagger along a little while. Morocco is betting that over the next few years they can win majority support on the African continent, change the position of the African Union even, and through that impose their position at the United Nations. I think if that happens, the Sahrawi people will be in a very bad and weak situation. And something in between that will satisfy everyone is a better option. But I don't know that that's going to happen.
All right. Naeem, Jeenah, always a pleasure talking to you. Your insights always invaluable. Thank you so much indeed. And take care.
Thanks.
All right, so that's Naeem Jeenah, the Executive Director at the Afro-Middle East Centre, talking about the situation in Morocco and Western Sahara, given that America under Donald Trump has given Morocco recognition of sovereignty across Western Sahara. But as Naeem says, it could be undone by Joe Biden when he takes over in January. We're going to take a quick break, and after that, the Chief Justice has been in the news. Find out why.